So with us today is Nora Dellifield. She was a state fashion board member and she graduated from high school last year, or this spring, actually this past spring. She's on her way to college. She interviewed and applied for several different places in fashion and costuming. And I want her to join us today. She's going to join us and introduce herself and talk a little bit about that experience.
Hello, my name is Nora Dellifield. Like Larissa said, I wanted to thank Larissa for inviting me to talk today and share a little bit about my experience, what I did this past year at deciding where I wanted to go to school and what major I wanted to go to school for. So I made a little presentation, so let's pull that up. Okay. Alrighty, so we'll just get started. A little pre-context. I did 4-H for 8 or 9 years, maybe 10. I lost track. I did it since I started when I was 9, and I did sewing every year except for 1 year I did scrapbooking. So I started in 4-H, and this is kind of what I did. So we're gonna start with picking your school and your major. So first of all, deciding what major what major interests you is like the first step. So there's lots of different ones that you can decide from. There's fashion business, fashion design, fashion marketing, merchandising, costume design, costume technology, wigs and makeup, and theater technology. This fall, I'm going to be going to DePaul University and I'm studying costume technology. Now, the one thing that I didn't know before I applied to this school was that this was even a thing, because I thought forever that I wanted to be a costume designer, but that's not true. What I wanted to do with my life was I wanted to sew the clothes that people wore in movies or on the stage or in dance and stuff like that. And there's a difference between design and technology in that the designers will decide what everyone is wearing and what it's going to look like, and then the technicians are the ones who make it. And that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to come up with the idea, but I wanted to execute the idea. So deciding what realm you want to go into is awesome. And so if any of you are thinking about doing like theater technology is a little different. Some schools don't offer the exact degree. So some schools don't offer costume technology or costume design, but they offer a theater tech degree with a concentration in costumes. So you would learn about lighting and sound, but your concentration would be in costumes. So another thing that I thought about too when I was deciding was I didn't know whether or not I wanted to do costumes or fashion in the beginning, and I thought that they would be good as interchangeable, and it is possible to interchange the two. So I had looked at different fashion design schools as well, because I could take a fashion design degree and do costumes with it. But finding a costume technology school was high priority on my list, and I did find that, so that was awesome. So that's the second part, is deciding whether or not the school that you're looking at has your major or the one you want to pursue, or can it be converted? So like, does the school offer fashion design and you can do costumes with it? Or does the school offer costumes and then you can take fashion design out of that? Deciding which one of those is more important to you is something that you want to think about. Also looking at what school you want to go to, like what materials do they offer or what machines do you have access to? So when I was looking at schools, DePaul University has a very big and beautiful workspace. There's so many windows in it. And for it being in the city, they have a lot of land, like they had a lot of space. Now, I also toured another school called Marymount Manhattan, which is in the middle of downtown Manhattan. And their space was this itty bitty, teeny tiny workspace in the basement. So they didn't have as many big machines or big dye vats and stuff like that that DePaul did. Now, not saying that their program isn't as good, but their materials that I had access to were not as many as the ones at DePaul. Another thing that I had looked at too was I looked at Pratt University, which is in Brooklyn, New York. And I toured that school the same time I went and toured Marymount Manhattan. And Pratt is in the middle of Brooklyn, so there's a lot more green space. And they had a bunch of different machines that I had never even heard of, but they were also a fashion design school. So they had big workrooms and lots of space for you to build. They had a knitting machine, which I thought was pretty cool, that I hadn't seen at any other school. So looking at what machines you have access to, and also if they're going to pay for your materials. So at DePaul this year, I will have to buy all of my own fabric and notions and such for my projects at school. Now, there was another school I toured that was University of North Carolina School for the Arts. And if I would have gone there for my costume tech degree, they would have paid for all of my fabric and all of my notions, but they would have kept it at the end of the project. So at DePaul, I'm paying for all of it, but I'm also keeping it so that way I can still keep it and show it to other people as a form of my portfolio and stuff like that. So when you're looking at schools, you want to decide whether or not you're going to want to pay for your materials, if you want to keep the things afterwards, and also what kind of machines are you going to get to learn how to use and what machines are you going to have access to. Another thing to think about too is if you're going to be able to take a visit. Now, a lot of the schools that I applied to were out of state. So I applied to 3 schools in Ohio and 3 schools out of state. I applied to Ohio Wesleyan University, Ohio State University, and Ohio Northern University. And none of those were my first choice, but I liked all of them. And I applied to 3 schools out of state, which was Pratt University, DePaul University, and University of North Carolina School of the Arts. Now, we had to plan a vacation, essentially, to go visit the schools out of state because it'd take us time to drive there, and we'd have to stay for a few days to get like a feel of the campus, and then we'd have to drive home. So planning a visit is awesome because you really want to be able to see the space in its entirety and not just a photo. And I realize that the coronavirus is around right now, so this year might not be the best time to be traveling, but if you're able to plan a visit before you go, then you really should because it's really beneficial. It's also good when you go to feel like, do you feel like you're at home? Like, do you feel like when you're there that you could live there? Do you feel like you can see yourself learning there and things like that? When I went on all of my tours, I kept a little pros and cons list on my phone. So when I was driving home from the visit, I would write down the things that I liked. And I would also, before I went, write down the things that I wanted to see. So for an example, like one of the things that was really important to me was that the place had green space. I really wanted to be able to go outside and sit outside in a green space because I knew that I'd be moving to a city more than likely, and I know that it can turn into a concrete jungle, and I wanted it to still feel a little bit like home because Ohio is very green and has lots of space for you to sit outside. So I made sure that that was one of the things on my list that was really important to me. Another thing that was really important to me was that I was going to be challenged in the curriculum. There were some schools that I had applied to that would have been great. Like I would have had a great time at them, but the material that I would be learning, I would come in more advanced than I wanted to. So I really wanted to be challenged and have a good opportunity to learn something that I didn't know. So that was one of the reasons that I chose DePaul, was because I would be starting out as a freshman just on tech crew. I wouldn't be able to sew any of the clothes for our first few productions. So I'd be learning about tech crew and I would have to work my way up the food chain. And I'd also get to take classes in wigs and makeup, which I don't know anything about right now. So that's going to be super awesome to have a little side off where I get to learn something different. And be sure when you go on your visits that you ask questions or come with a list of questions, because sometimes, like when I would get in the car, I'd be like, oh, I wish I would have asked that because I didn't know about it until I got there. So make sure that you brainstorm questions with your parents. They're probably going to have some good ideas or some things that they want to hear, and ask questions that you want to know about. It may sound silly, like some of your questions might sound like they're a little silly, but it doesn't matter because they're going to answer your questions and it'll be great. And then make sure you keep your pros and cons list too. Because when I came back after I had applied, I went back to my pros and cons list that I'd made 2 or 3 years ago just to have a refresher, and that really helped my decision making. Alrighty, next is your application. So once you, this is more for like the people who are not, this is something that doesn't happen until the beginning of your senior year, because picking your school is the most important thing. And you guys can do that. I forgot to mention that picking your school, if you don't really have an idea of where you want to go to school yet, just search best schools for fashion design on Google or best costume technology schools on Google, because there are a lot of them that are in Ohio. And I didn't think that I wanted to stay in Ohio, but there were a lot of schools in Ohio that I could have went to, and that was pretty cool to hear. So let's talk about your application. What type of application? The common app, the personal, hybrid, or both? So for the schools that I had applied to, there were two different kinds of applications I had to fill out. There was the common application, which some of my schools accepted, and that one's really easy. You fill out this application that everyone accepts, and then you submit it to all of them at the same time, and it's super convenient. The other thing I had to do was some schools didn't accept the common application, so I had to fill out their own application. Now, it's essentially the same thing as the common app, just a different essay topic. And most of the time it's because they're art schools and they want to hear about your art experience specifically. So I had to write something called an artistic statement, which was basically why I like to sew, why I wanted to sew for a living, and what I wanted to do with it. So if you're able to write that essay now or just a gist of it, it'd be super helpful for when you're going to need it later, because I'm sure most of you can explain why you like to be artistic now. It's not going to change in a year. Another thing that I did too was I had to get a resume together. And a resume is just something that tells everyone a little bit about yourself and your education and everything like that. So your resume should include where you went to school, when you graduated, what your grade point average is, if you took any CCP classes. It also should include your work experience, if you had a job or if you had an internship, little things like that. It should also include your extracurricular involvement, your sports and your clubs, your leadership positions in those sports and clubs. So if you guys had any, like if you were the president of your 4-H club or the captain of the track team, you would put those down, especially because people are going to want to hear about those. Also, your volunteer opportunities. So if you help out at your church in your nursery, or if you helped out at a kiddie camp or vacation Bible school, you definitely want to put those down. And then also your awards and accomplishments. So if you had won anything at school, if you were on the All-A honor roll, anything like that you've gotten a big award for. So your 4-H awards would be a great thing to put down, because people want to see what you've done and how you've been involved in your high school career.
Hey, Nora, can I ask, how far back should that information go?
It should only go back as far as your freshman year of high school. There are a lot of things that I wanted to write down that I had done, but I had done them in 7th grade, and colleges don't really care about what you did in middle school. They just want to hear about what you did in high school. So only put down the things that you did in high school. When you're applying to a fine arts education and worrying about what classes you're going to take to put on your resume, I would definitely weigh your art classes a little more seriously than your math classes. And this is not to say that STEM is not important, because STEM is very important. But for an example, or at least my personal experience, what had happened was, is my last year of high school, I had to decide whether taking calculus or an art class was more important. Now, if I had taken calculus, I would have been valedictorian of my class, but I decided that the art class I was taking was definitely more important for my further education than being the valedictorian of my class was right now. So weigh your arts education and your art classes a lot heavier if you're thinking about that sort of thing, or you come to a point like that where they're going to make you choose. Be sure to weigh your arts education as highly as your STEM education, because even if your school doesn't, you should. Oh, another thing too that goes with your application is your references. So when you apply, especially for the Common App and for other applications too, they're going to ask you to have references, whether that be a teacher or 4-H advisor. They want somebody to write you a recommendation that makes you desirable to them and kind of really tells you how good of a person that you are and how good you've done in school. So for an example, I chose my choir director because I was in show choir and he really knew all of my good leadership abilities and my good brainstorming topics. I was able to work in a team. I also did my science teacher because I was not great at science, but I really liked his class and me and him really got along. So I chose him. And then I also had my 4-H advisor, Amanda, write me one because I was a camp counselor for her and she could really speak to how I work well with others and I brainstorm good things. So pick people that you like and who really know you for you and be able to talk to your character the best. And if you ask them a couple months in advance, they might be able to get it done for you and then you'll have it ready to go. You won't have to worry about it getting in on crunch time. And this next slide, I have an example of my resume. Now this is the one that I kind of condensed down a little bit, and there are some things in here that you guys might not have just yet, just because I have my college scholarships on here right now because I had to submit these to a couple different people about it's a little more updated than it would need to be. So I have, at the top, I have a summary of some adjectives that describe me. And then I have my skills, so like hand sewing, and then I can also use Google Drive and Microsoft Office. Now, I felt really stupid for putting that on there, but my parents told me that not everybody can use Microsoft Word or knows how to use a computer. So it's important that you put down that you know how to use a computer and those various softwares. Then I have my work experience, where I went to school, what my ACT score was, my academic awards, my extracurricular activities, where the leadership I had was, and my volunteer experience at the bottom. I also put at the top under my name my contact information, just in case the people who were seeing my resume would be able to contact me, just in case they lost my email, that they had it in another spot on there too. All right, the next piece of your application is your portfolio. I'm gonna get a drink real quick. Now this is the point that's most fun to gather together because you get to look at everything you've made and decide what you really want to show off. So showing off your creativity is the most important thing. And if you're going to a sewing school or a fashion design school, your portfolio is going to have some of your sewing examples in it. So for an example, I put my 4-H projects in it, my 4 fun projects, the ones I made that weren't for 4-H that I just did for fun. And not just my clothing. So if you had made a bag or if you had made like hair scrunchies, they want to just see how you've been creative and what you know how to do. So for some schools, so like for DePaul, if you applied for costume design, they wanted to see a more heavily based portfolio in renderings and drawings because the designers are going to spend most of their time drawing and showing people what they want to make. And the technicians, which is what I'm going to be, were more sewing heavy. So my portfolio this year was very much all the things that I've sewn and all the things that I've made. So if you're going for design school, it might be more important to really practice your sketching and your art and your drawing, and then show a little bit of your sewing. But if you're planning on going for technology, you'd want it to be a little more sewing heavy and then have a little bit of your drawings. So like the opposite. So I had my sewing projects and my 4 fun projects and not just my clothing projects. So another example for that. So at the Ohio 4-H conference, I took a class with Mary Rodinger, and she was teaching a class about circuit sewing. So I sat in her class and I sewed a little circuit bracelet and then the 2 snaps put together and it made the whole bracelet light up. And I didn't really think about it until like the last minute. And I was like, I'm gonna take this just to show the person that is looking at my portfolio that I can sew a circuit or sew in some lights. And at my interview, we talked about that bracelet for 20 minutes. So don't sweat the small things because it'll be good to add the small things in because they might be really interesting even though I didn't even think about it. The other things that you're going to want to show are your paintings and your sculptures. Oops, I skipped drawings and renderings. So for drawings and renderings, it would be like if you've drawn up any clothing designs or before you sewed something, like if you drew a sketch of it, like you'll want to put that in there. Also observational drawings and still lifes. Now for being honest, I didn't really know a whole lot about these before I put in my portfolio process. So my art career, I love to paint and I love to do lots of things with like melting plastic and gluing on like newspapers and stuff like that. So I did a lot of those like hindsight projects and not a lot of sit down and draw projects. And I sat down with my art teacher last year and I said, there's a school that requires me to have 2 observational drawings, 2 still lifes, and just another one that is my choice. And he explained to me what those were. So definitely talk to your art teacher. So for an example, my observational drawing was I'd sat down in a hallway and I drew the hallway to scale. Like that was an observational drawing. And then a still life drawing was we set up some fake apples on a table and I drew the fake apples on the table. So I had to have 2 of those and 2 observational drawings. And I didn't know that I needed those until 2 weeks before I knew my portfolio was due, because I didn't read all of the requirements. So be sure that you read all of your requirements for your portfolio, because I figured that my sewing was going to be enough, but Pratt University required that I send in my drawings as well. So be sure to check what they require. You could also send in your sculptures if you're in like a ceramics class, and you can also send in your photography. They just want to see how your art's unique and where you have the potential to grow as an artist. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing that you have has to be perfect. They just want to see your potential to grow. You also want to make sure that you're sending everything in the correct format. So for Pratt University, I first got deferred from their school, which means that I wasn't denied, but I wasn't accepted. And I'm pretty sure the reason that I got deferred was because the way I sent in my sewing photos was not very detailed. Because for Pratt, I didn't have an in-person interview. And all of my other schools, I did have an in-person interview. So make sure that if you're sending your photos in for an online format, that you take good pictures of them and not just use the ones that you have. Like I didn't take new photos of them. I just sent the photos that I had. And if I had taken a little more detail and a little more time to send them in, then I might have had a better chance of being accepted. So make sure that you check the format that your portfolio needs to be sent in and like do it to the best of your ability. And you can always ask questions too if you have like a question for them, like what's the best way for me to send this in? And they'll answer you. I just didn't do that and I wish I had. So here are some examples of what I did. So this one down here in the corner, this drawing is an example of a still life drawing that I did. The next one is me and my friend Alex, and I made our homecoming dresses that year. And I brought this one because it really shows that I can work with stretch knits and satin, and we got it tailored to us. Like we made sure that they fit us both correctly. Same thing with down here with my friend Arlene's Christmas outfit. I was showing that I could work with different materials and sparkles and stretch knits, and that I was able to tailor it to her. And also this was the most costumey piece that I ever made. I never really made costumes. I mostly made clothing, like everyday wear for people. So this was the most costumey thing that I had ever made. And then the top photo is one of my first 4-H projects that I did. That was like sewing, that I did a better job on than it was just like my first year. And that was my little skirt that I made for my cousin Sophie, and the first time I had sewn with knits. So when I went to my interview, which is the next, I'm talking about the next slide, I took all of these to show my growth in knits. So I had sewn Sophie's knit top first, and I had sewn me and Alex's and Arlene's knit top second. So I was able to show them my growth, where I had, this one isn't as great, but these ones are really good, and this is how I fixed it the next time I did it, which is a super important part of your interview. So again, like I had said with the viewing the school, with the tour of the school, you may have to plan a trip to get your interview, because I had to go to Chicago to interview when I went to interview for DePaul, and we took a few days and we went to the city and it was fun. And then I also had to plan a trip when I interviewed for University of North Carolina. We went all the way down to North Carolina and we spent a couple days there too, and I had to interview in person. So that may be like a cost to your family. You may have to like budget a little bit, and also decide like if you're going to be able to miss school. For both of my interviews, I had to miss a day of school, which means I had to make up some work, which wasn't that fun, but it was worth it in the end that I missed the day of school to go and interview for my next school. So, and then also this year, I'm not sure how it's going to work because of the coronavirus and everything. So a lot of the interviews may be online, but that it would be fine. It would be totally okay, and it'll be awesome even if it's online. So when you go to your interview, you want to talk about what you know and exude lots of confidence. You may not feel very confident in there because you're talking to professionals who know a lot more than you do. And I'm not gonna lie, I felt kind of intimidated at a couple of them because these people know so much. They're looking at your stuff and you're getting a little like anxious about it. You don't want them to see something that you did wrong. But the one thing that I did was I was conversational and I told stories about all of my things. So when they'd ask me a question like, oh, why'd you do it like this? I would tell them the whole story. Well, I started it with this and then this happened and I didn't know what to do. So then I looked it up and I did this instead. So I created a big story so that they were able to get to know me better in the way that I worked. And I also pointed out my mistakes before they did because that just makes me feel a lot better. And I think it was a good idea because then it shows you that you are accepting your mistakes and that also you're going to tell them how you're going to fix it the next time. The one thing that the master clothing educators are very good at the state fair is they're really good at giving you the tips and tricks to fix it the next time. So there was I made a wool coat one year and I thought I did a really good job on it because I followed the pattern to a T and it was the first time I had ever sewn something start to finish by myself without my grandma. And I got to the state fair and the judge was very helpful in pointing out that I didn't put in corded buttonholes or sleeve heads. And that was something I'd never heard before. I was like, I didn't even know I had to put those in. I didn't even know they existed. So when I went to my school interview, I said, this is my wool coat that I made, and I'm really proud of it, despite the fact that the buttonholes aren't corded and there aren't sleeve heads. But the next time I make a wool coat, I'm definitely going to put both of those in. And the interviewer that I was talking to was very like, oh, yes, I would definitely do that too next time. I'm really happy that you pointed that out because I was thinking about that. And you were able to talk to them about, hey, I know how I'm going to fix it. Another thing too that you want to do at your interview is you're going to want to bring a list of questions for your interviewer. They're going to have lots of questions for you, but you should have questions for them. So you should talk to them about what kind of internships they might offer or connections to different people in the outside workforce, what kind of things you're going to be able to get involved in as a student. And if you're going to a theater school, you could talk about what kind of productions you're going to do. And then like fashion design schools, like what kind of a showcase you might get involved in. Because if you bring the list of questions and ask them questions, then they think that you are just as invested in the school as they're going to be invested in you. You're showing interaction and that you are really interested in the school as well. Also, when you're done, get either their email address or the address of the school in their office because you're going to want to send them a thank you note. And if you send them a thank you note, then they're more likely to remember you. And then it also is just a really nice thing to do because they spent some of their time to talk to you and get to know you a little better. So you should send them a thank you note. It's just a really nice thing to do. And a lot of people are straying away from thank you notes, but I don't think that we should. I think we should still be sending out a hard copy, old-fashioned thank you note. I think it's just a really good idea. And then your last step is your acceptance and your decision. So check your email regularly and check all of your folders. So the one thing that I didn't know was on Google, there is something called an important folder where it doesn't go to your inbox, but it goes to your regular important folder. And there were so many important things that went in there that didn't go to my regular inbox, including a cancellation of one of my interviews that I didn't know about until 2 weeks beforehand. So make sure that you check all of your folders. Whether you don't think you need to check it or not, go through the spam folder and go through all of the discount codes and everything because there might be something really important in there. Also, when you're getting letters to your home, like hard mail, open all of it and watch for big packets. And also open the small ones too, because even though if you're a senior or a junior, you're going to be getting lots of little mail from schools trying to get you to apply. And sometimes the really important ones will get washed in with all of the ones that are like, please apply, please apply. So make sure you open everything and read everything carefully because something might have something really important for you on it. And you're also going to want to save everything that you get sent. So if you get an acceptance packet in the mail, there's going to be lots of important information in there. So you start a drawer or start a folder that you can put all of it in there for every school that you get. Because when you sit down to make your decision on where you want to go to school, you're going to use all of those papers to really think about where you want to go. Again, bring out your pros and cons list again to compare. You're going to want to pull those things out of the drawer again and look at like, I don't remember if I really liked that space or not, or what did that space look like? oh, I wrote down on here that I really liked that it was big and it had a big green space and it had big windows. Oh, now I remember what that place looks like. So your pros and cons list is going to be really helpful on when you're making your decision. You're also going to want to look at what kind of financial aid the school is offering you, what kind of scholarships. I'm not big on being the financial aid being the big thing that makes you decide where you go to school, because if you really feel at home and you really like the school, then spending a little extra money on it isn't a big deal. I think that it would be a great idea to spend a little extra money to get a really nice education and be really comfortable where you are. So scholarships and financial aid are very important, but they shouldn't be the only deciding factor on where you decide to go to school. You should decide on whether the program curriculum and the program caliber is up to your standards and what you really like about it, and then also campus life and location. So I didn't mention this before, but I'm going to mention it now. One of the reasons I had 2 really good schools I got applied to. I got accepted to. I got accepted to DePaul, and I got accepted to University of North Carolina School of the Arts. And they were both very similar in their program curriculum and their caliber. They were both very intense schools that would have given me a great education. And one of the big deciding factors and the reason that I chose DePaul and not University of North Carolina was because when I went to the school, I asked students, I said, what do you guys do to get involved? And the only thing that they did was sew for the shows that they were doing at the moment. They didn't have any other clubs. They didn't have anything that they did fun on the weekends. They just sewed and worked all the time. At least that's how I perceived it. And I wasn't okay with that. I really wanted to have a full-rounded college experience where I got to meet other people, join a sorority, join a choir, do something different that wasn't all theater all the time. So really knowing about campus life and where it is awesome, and you should really put that into account when you're deciding where to go to school. Also, the location. So University of North Carolina was very different from DePaul. DePaul is in the middle of Lincoln Park, in the middle of Chicago. So it's super urban feel, very downtown feeling, like very different than Ohio. It was very different than University of North Carolina, which was pretty much like Ohio, in the middle of nowhere. It's its own little campus. It's very secluded, and where it was great for that because you were like very focused on the craftsmanship of your stuff and school. I really liked the idea of getting to go to a big city and meet new people and new cultures and lots of different food and have the opportunity to live somewhere new that didn't feel like home. So really take into account what your pros and cons list is and what you really liked about each school. And then you can send in your confirmation and wait to see what happens. I think that's about all that I had to say. Does anybody have any questions? Or did I forget anything?
Awesome job, Nora. One of the things I noted was that you listed on your resume a program that I believe you found out about because of State Fashion Board and my sister talking about.
I know which one you're talking about. I did find out about that from your sister.
So that did get mentioned in our technical design session here last week. And they showed a little bit about that program. Tell me or tell them what you went about to get that, because that contact, and now these guys have gotten even more information about some of that than you had with just my sister coming to a State Fashion Board meeting one year. Yeah. Like, what did you do from that? Because I think that's important for people to know.
So I knew about it because your sister did the presentation on it. And I went on the website and kind of learned a little more about it. And I realized that it was going to cost a lot of money. So I was like, I don't really know how I'm going to be able to learn how to use this. So I went to my school's technology instructor, Mr. Klingler, and I enrolled for his digital graphics class. And normally in digital graphics, you spend most of your time on Adobe Photoshop and you learn how to alter photos and make stuff through Adobe Photoshop. And I did the first part of the year on Adobe Photoshop and learned how to use the computer correctly and all that kind of thing. And then I said, for the second half of the semester, would I be able to do an independent study on this program? And he was all for it. He was like, this sounds awesome. I've never had anybody ask me about this program before. I've never even heard of this program before. I think it'd be really awesome if we figure out how to do it. So he signed up for a free trial through his school account. And then I used that and I learned how to use it. And I would watch YouTube videos on and create. We found a few different people on YouTube who did like tutorials on like, this is how you make this dress in Clo 3D. So I would follow the tutorial and then send him the finished product of the tutorial. And I did that for a few different things. I think I made a dress on there and I rendered a pattern for a backpack. And then at the end of the year, I didn't end up finishing it because the end of the school year was over, but I started by designing my homecoming outfit that I had made that was like in person, but then I made so it was like backwards. I made the outfit and then I made the pattern for it online. But yeah, I did a free trial for it. And I haven't purchased it yet because I don't have the money right now. But once I do, I really want to purchase it for myself.
So don't be afraid to ask teachers. If you see something or experience something that you think would be beneficial, ask. All they can do is tell you no. She got experience on the Clo 3D, which we've seen talked about at one of our previous sessions, and is able to put that in her resume as she applied, which is not a normal thing you see in a high school resume. So ask those questions when you hear great opportunities or things.
And Nora, could you share with everyone where you live and how large your school is so that they're not intimidated by if they are from a smaller area?
So my graduating class was 75 in the end, and my town has around 3,000, I think. 3,000 people. Yeah.
So you don't have to have you don't have to go to a big school to get access to some of these things. Sometimes it's easy to look at larger schools and say, wow, they have all of these opportunities. But if you're from a smaller school, you still can build opportunities and make opportunities for yourself.
Yeah.
Questions that some of you have as members looking down the road to that you have for Nora?
If you have any specific questions about any of the schools that I applied to or any of the schools I toured, like I'm free to ask those too. It doesn't just have to be about the general application process.
Did you ever look into Kent State?
So basically what happened with Kent State is I never toured there. And I had it on my application list to begin with. And I decided that I thought about applying there. And then I kept saying to my mom, I don't feel comfortable paying $50 to apply when I haven't seen it yet. And I never got around to seeing it, but then I ended up falling in love with 3 other schools that I really liked. And I didn't end up applying to Kent State. I have heard great things about their fashion design program though. I have heard lots of great things.
And if you're looking at Kent State for costuming too, we have had friends who have attended there in costuming, and it's really cool because they do a lot of their internships with the Cleveland Playhouse. And so you'll get experience as a dresser and things like that backstage on a lot of those touring shows. So it is definitely top rated for sure.
It's the same thing with Baldwin Wallace University as well. They do a lot of their stuff with the Cleveland Playhouse too.
Other questions any of our 4-H members have? Or adults that are on?
Are there any 4-H sewing projects that you would definitely recommend taking to get an experience?
I think that all of the projects were very beneficial. My favorite project that I did was outerwear, just because I loved making that coat, even though it didn't turn out as perfect as it should have. The one I took Sew for Others twice, because when I was going into costuming, I wanted to be able to say that I could tailor things to people of different sizes, and that I got used to sewing for other people. So Sew for Others is a great one because you can also make it anything that you want. It doesn't have a special requirement like Sew Fun does. Like Sew Fun says you make an elastic waist skirt and that's what you have to make. But Sew for Others was really great because you got to be super creative with it. And surprisingly, I never took creative costumes, but I could assume that that project would be really good if you're going to costuming too, but I just never got around to taking that one. The one thing that I will say with sewing in 4-H, I don't think that the exact project you take is as important as getting the experience with different types of materials. So for what I did for each one of my projects was I tried something new. So I started with Sew Fun like everybody does. And then the next year I did loungewear, and I had never sewn with this weird fleecy material, and it was awful. It was so bad to sew with it. But I can say that I've sewn with it now, and I tried something new. And then the next year I did a skirt. I did clothing for high school when I should have done sundresses and jumpers because I made a sundress, but I put go days in it and a zipper, and I had never done go days and I'd never done a zipper. So when you do each project, try to either pick a new material you've never sewn with, whether it's denim or velvet, corduroy, something like pick something new and difficult, and then also pick a new and difficult thing that you've never done. So whether you've never sewn a zipper or you've never put sleeve heads in a coat, try something new. Make sure that you get lots of different things and don't just stick to the same thing that you're good at.
Nora, on that same note of 4-H projects, can you tell us about the importance of learning to use a commercial pattern instead of just cutting apart clothing in your closet and making a pattern yourself?
So when I went to my interview for DePaul, the lady I was talking to, her name's Deanna, she's my new professor. She was astounded that I knew how to read a commercial pattern, because most of the people that go into costuming anyway are cosplayers. So if you don't know what cosplay is, it's when people dress up as like video game characters or characters from TV show or stuff like that, and they go to like different conventions or post it online like them cosplaying different people. And most of those people either hot glue their outfits or look up tutorials on YouTube. So it's really important to learn how to sew commercial patterns, because a lot of people who don't do it through 4-H don't know how to sew with commercial patterns, and they're very important because they teach you how to sew correctly and do things with fine tune and everything like that. So it was something that I had like thought of, like, it's no brainer that you would sew with a pattern. I don't know how else you would learn how to sew. Like how I started how to sew. I don't know why you wouldn't start with a pattern, but it was apparently something that was very different for her to see that a high schooler knew how to sew with a commercial pattern. So if you guys know how to do that, you're already a leg up.
And I would throw out there too for everyone, right, as you're looking at that and thinking about your next 4-H projects, if you choose to make your own pattern, follow the guidelines of a commercial pattern when you are making a pattern, right? We tried, and if you haven't figured out from the last names, right, I'm Nora's mom, so I'm sitting in a different room, but can you tell them about how we tried to sew gloves from one of the patterns that we found online, and how for Arlene? Do you remember when we did that?
Yeah.
So
No,
it was not good. So we tried to follow a glove pattern that was here's the best way to make gloves. It did not work at all. So I encourage you to follow, even if you have to make your own pattern, follow all of those little diamonds and, etch everything out that you need to as well. And then bring that along to show, because that does help in your portfolio to keep those things, to show that you designed it on your own, and that you've taken that next step in your learning.
Another thing too is if you don't want to use a pattern, like for the certain project that you're doing, look up videos on how to drape things on a dress form, because although I don't know exactly how to drape, I'm going to learn at school. I did drape a few things on my dress form for fun, and it was actually a really fun experience. And now I don't know if I've done it exactly correctly, but just being like a little artistic and figuring out a new way to do things, and I was really proud of myself to say that I did it by myself without a pattern. Like, oh, this is original. This is something that I made for myself. So try draping if you haven't yet. And it doesn't have to be for 4-H. You could just do it for fun. But I would definitely recommend trying it. It was a good time. I had a good time.
So Nora, I tried to pull in this series activities from projects other than sewing occasionally. And so are there any other projects that you wish you would have taken, or that you've gained experience from that were not sewing, that you think you can apply to where you're at in your career path?
The one project I didn't take that was sewing was scrapbooking, and as much as I loved it, I don't think I'm a scrapbooker. So, I mean, I can see the importance in scrapbooking from an artistic standpoint. Like, it was really cool to like cut out paper and kind of glue it all down. Like, that was really fun. But a couple projects I wish I had taken were, as silly as it sounds, the laundry project, because learning how to launder clothing correctly is a really good skill. And I never took like an actual art project. I just took art classes at school. But I think that the 4-H art book, I've seen some other people who have had it. It has some really good information in it when it comes to like the color wheel and stuff like that. So if you can take like general art classes and general art things, they're really helpful to sewing. Like I learned a lot. More so, I learned a lot of my last year of art, my art 4 class, even though it got cut short, because I got to choose lots of the things, and my art teacher really helped me like fine tune a lot of the little things that I needed to know. And so general art is awesome. You should know a lot about it, even if you're just going into sewing and stuff like that. Yeah.
Any other questions? You can either put them in the chat or unmute. If not, it is already 10 till. So this is the time we usually do the breakout into the group setting, as well as the activity, which the activity fit really well because it was the activity from Are You Ready for Work on making resumes. So that tied in perfectly for what Nora showed on her resume